The thing I want to admit is the title of this talk is How Islam Saved Western Civilization. I have nested a contradiction in the title that I'm going to show you later on purpose because I like to do things like that. It's just my nature. So I just want you to know I'm admitting this right off the start. The Persians and the Greeks are in this epic back and forth. And eventually the Persians get bored with the Greeks and stop fighting them. And then Alexander the Great conquers them out of the blue. And this is this unbelievable event. And then that Greek civilization starts to come apart and gets replaced by this Roman civilization. And the Romans are amazing conquerors. They take the Greek phalanx, they upgrade it, they turn it into the Roman legion. The Persians eventually recover from the Greek conquest. And now the new clash is between the Persians and the Romans. The Persians and the Romans fight it out. Brutal, nasty, knockdown, drag-out fights. And then something amazing happens. There's a new religion. And it's Islam. The Prophet Muhammad dies in 632. That year, the Caliph, his follower, the first ruler after the Prophet, orders that the Arabian Peninsula be conquered and unified. For the first time in Arab history, the Arabian Peninsula was ruled by a single state within a year. That same year, 633, Abu Bakr launches two armies at the same time, simultaneously. One into the Persian Empire, one into the Roman Empire. Outnumbered, outmanned, out-technologied. There's no way the Arabs should prevail. Within a few decades, they completely conquer the Persian Empire. It was 1,200 years old at that point. Can you imagine a 1,200-year-old empire? You can't comprehend it not being there. They bring the Romans to their knees. They don't finish them off. But by the time they're done, so from 633, the moment they start the conquering, to 711, the moment they've conquered Spain, they owned everything from Pakistan to Spain and Central Asia. They built the largest empire in human history in just a few decades. 60% of the world's Christian population. The empire itself was 2% Muslim. But it owned 60% of the world's Christians. It was an empire of Buddhists and Hindus. There were even some pagans hanging around. And Zoroastrians. The Arabs were a strange conqueror population because they weren't forcibly converting people by the sword. They weren't mass genociding whole populations. They weren't enslaving 1/3 of Gaul. They did fight in France, just for the record. 725? That's the year stuck in my head. It's probably wrong. The Battle of Tours, also known as the Battle of Poitiers, against Charles Martel. And the French win, just for the record. But the Arabs, as they were retreating, carved off Narbonne and continued to rule a piece of France for a few centuries. These Arabs were actually were humble. So when they conquered Persia, they went to the Persians and they went, dude, we don't know how to run an empire. This is way over our pay grade. We just started ruling ourselves. We don't know what we're doing here. You guys are amazing at this. What we need you to do is keep running the empire. We don't even know how to mint coins. The first Arab coins show 3 men standing next to each other. They're holding a cross in one hand and a globe with a cross sticking out of it. So they got a cross in both hands. Because they took the Roman mint and they just began counterfeiting Roman coins. In fact, the word fulus, which is the word for money, comes from the Roman folus, which was one of the coins that they were counterfeiting. Those Arabs walked into Gondi Shapur after conquering it. And they turned to the Persians and they went, what's that? And the Persians go, it's an academy. The Arabs go, cool, what is that? They go, it's a repository of all the knowledge of the world that we know of. And the Arabs go, show us. And the Persians go, what choice do we have? Take them in. And the Arabs go, teach us. And the Persians go, what choice do we have? We will. It takes a while. It doesn't happen right away. But in the 8th century, Al-Kindi begins converting these texts from Greek to Arabic. And that's a huge leap because now it means a larger portion of the population can start to read them. A guy named Al-Khwarizmi, a Persian, a Muslim Persian in the Arab Empire, decides to start focusing heavily on Hindu mathematics. Al-Khwarizmi invents algebra and Arabic numerals. So the next time you're doing math, remember to thank Al-Khwarizmi that you're not using an abacus to do Roman numerals, which are impossible. Really try. Set up Roman numerals, put a minus sign under it, and try and subtract Roman numerals from Roman numerals. You'll tear your hair out. Forget multiplication and division. Al-Khwarizmi creates a math system that you can work on. He's so advanced, he invents algorithms 1,200 years ago. In fact, algorithm was the Roman attempt to say his name. Al-Khwarizmi, algorithm. Until Ibn Sina, medicine looked like this. There was disease, and the way disease affected you, but was based on, did you eat fish and drink milk? And did a black cat walk in front of you? Was Jupiter in alignment with Saturn? If so, when disease hits you, you're going to bleed from the eyes and have uncontrollable bowel movements. Ibn Sina walks up and goes, this is nonsense. What are you talking about? There isn't disease, there's diseases. They're all different, and they have different transmission vectors. So one disease, you sneeze on it, you get it. Another disease, you touch fecal matter and you get it. Another disease is bloodborne. Another disease comes by insects. Another disease comes from rats. In other words, what we need to do is we need to think about the transmission vectors. In his book, here you go, Qanun Tib, The Canon of Medicine is the book he writes. In it, he includes hundreds of cures. We still use a bunch of those cures today. In Europe and the Middle East, his book is still necessary reading in medical school. But that's not what's interesting about him. Here's what he says. He says, you know what's better than all these cures I stuck in here? Prevention. Your goal is not to get the disease to begin with. If you cannot get the disease, that's way better than getting the disease, risking dying and getting cured, and then dealing with the side effects of the disease later. That's why he's the father of modern medicine. He's that guy who said interrupt the transmission vectors. So when I was taught this in school, I was taught that Semmelweis, the Hungarian, figured this out. Yes, Semmelweis, the Hungarian, figured it out again 800 years after Ibn Sina figured it out first. Ibn Sina had a contemporary. His name was Ibn al-Haytham. And so Ibn al-Haytham is right there at the beginning. And he writes a book, which in 1021 is the Book of Optics. We think Ibn al-Haytham wrote 120 books. We have 30 of them. We're missing 90. Of the 30 that we have, they're almost all on mathematics. He was a mathematical genius. He started doing calculus before anybody. So, yeah, sorry, it wasn't Leibniz or Newton. It was Ibn al-Haytham. He's the guy who came up with the scientific method. It was Ibn al-Haytham. He had a 6-step method for the scientific method. He's the guy who figured out the lens. I'm very grateful. Every day I wake up, I go, thank you. And I put them on. He reinvented the camera obscura. Lao Tzu invented the world's first camera obscura, but his material was just largely destroyed and not enough of it made it through. Ibn al-Haytham reinvented the camera obscura. During this time period, actually before this time period, around the year 800, the Arabs invented modern agriculture. The way they did that was they de-peasantized the population of farmers that they had inherited when they conquered the Persian and Roman empires. And they created private property with the hope that then the peasants who were now free, who now owned their own land, could do whatever they wanted to with it. They would experiment and they'd figure out the best ways to do agriculture instead of just doing the same old thing over and over again. In other words, the incentive of profit motivation might trigger something, and it does. One of the things that they figure out is crop rotation. They're the guys who invent that. They also realize, don't keep planting the same crop over and over again. What if there's a blight? What if there's an insect plague? You're reliant on one food, makes you dangerously at the mercy of that food. And so you need to have diversified crops. So one of the things the Arabs did was they went around looking for new things to grow, and they're the guys who start the coffee industry. They take these beans that they find in Ethiopia that they realize they can do something with, and they bring them to Yemen, and they plant them in the province of Yemen named Mocha, and start the coffee industry. They also realize you can pack fresh food on a ship and send it to the other side of Asia. All you had to do is pack it full of ice. And so they were sending fresh food to China and India by packing ships full of ice. They had plumbing. And by plumbing, I mean fresh water was pumped in, sewage water was pumped out. They invented water wheels to make the pumping work. So you could just use the power of a river to run your pump. They lit up their streets at night. So in other words, if you walk down the streets of Baghdad 1,000 years ago, as you're walking down that street at night, there were oil lamps. In other words, if I took a satellite and I put it in orbit around the Earth 1,000 years ago and I stuck it so it was always at night, so I'd see the whole planet at night and photographed it. The whole planet's pitch dark, except for everything from Iraq to Pakistan, the cities twinkled like they do now. Ibn al-Haytham speculated that all objects in the universe exerted gravity. I don't know how you observe that. I mean, I get that the floor is exerting gravity over me, but he said all objects. How is the wall pulling me? I don't experience that. He also said light has a finite speed and it travels in waves. His book of optics was 1021. This was 1,001 years ago. But what we are told is that the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the medieval period starts with the fall of Rome in 476 and doesn't end until sometime around 1492, that it lasts 1,000 years. There's 1,000 years without knowledge. But I just showed you that there was actually extraordinary developments that were taking place, including calculus 600 years before Newton. Ibn al-Haytham stated Newton's first law of motion 600 years before Newton. He actually described Kepler's first law of planetary motion 500 years before Kepler. In other words, there's no separation between any of this. It's all connected together. One last thing. So the Arabs had idiomatically translated Aristotle into Arabic. When the Spanish were conquering Spain from the Muslims, they kept encountering libraries. The popes kept issuing edicts to burn all the books. Well, the monks who were ordered to destroy the books were the Benedictines and the Dominican monks. The Benedictines and the Dominican monks didn't obey the order. What they did was they dug giant underground libraries beneath their monasteries. When they would show up to the place with the Muslim library that they had to burn, they would have a guy read. They had a guy who would stand here and they had the book. They would turn the book so it was facing him so he could read it. He was a human card catalog. He knew the list, the names of all the books they had in their secret underground library. So as you would walk by, he'd read it. If he recognized the book, he'd give you one signal and you'd dump it in a pile in the middle of the town. If he didn't recognize it, he'd give you another signal and you'd walk over to a cart where they had a hidden panel and you'd slide the book into that. and then you'd walk back and you'd go grab another book. And then you'd carry it so that that guy could read it. And then, oh, that one goes in this pile. And then afterwards, they'd set that pile on fire so they could show everybody they were burning the books. And then they'd sneak the other books into their underground library where they were busy translating it from Arabic into ancient Greek and Latin. We would have lost it all because the Christians were going around burning everything. What happened that was, not only did the Benedictine and the Dominican monks have second thoughts about this and refuse to follow their orders. It's good to not follow orders sometimes. But the Italians went, you know what I miss? The good old days when we had science and math and philosophy. Why don't we do that again? And sometime around 1300, they do the Renaissance. 1300, the Crusades end in 1291. After the Crusaders start coming back, they go, you know what we saw when we were there murdering all those Muslims and Jews? They had indoor plumbing and medicine and crop rotation. They're talking about things have gravity and that light has a finite speed and that the universe originates from a point of information. And the Italians go, oh wow, that's so cool. Let's do that here. Isn't that crazy? In Texas, for example, we do community property divorce. We got that from Mexico. Mexico's Catholic. It didn't have divorce. Mexico got it from Spain. Spain is Catholic. Spain didn't have divorce. When the Arabs ruled Spain, they got sick of all the deadbeat husbands who were divorcing their wives for younger models and then leaving the children to be raised by those divorced wives who no longer had a source of income. So there were all these kids living in the streets. So what they did in Spain was they created a system where all the property generated from the moment of the marriage's start to the moment of the marriage's end got split in half, period, end of story. That's community property law. So you'll hear this thing that conservatives will say, I'm worried about Sharia law. Well, then don't get divorced. Because that's Muslim law. We're all interconnected. There's no separating any of this out from anything. Our language is like this. Admiral is an Arabic word. Zenith, nadir, algebra, those are all Arabic words. Zero is an Arabic word. Apricot is an Arabic word. There's no winning if you really wanted to do this because there's no separating us out from each other.